Good afternoon and welcome to People Making Money, one of the Way to Wow shows. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we are here every Wednesday afternoon, 12:30 Pacific time, 3:30 Eastern time, and an hour in for Mountain and Central time. And we talk about all things professional and financial. So sometimes I'll have a guest, as I did, I believe it was as recently as last week. And other times we'll talk about various financial issues, financial planning, wealth building, which is what we're going to do today. So we're going to talk about debt and how it, what kind of tool it is, how to use it wisely, and how to eliminate debt, or at least eliminate the kind of debt that is detrimental to our financial well-being. So I'm going to jump right into the things today, and I don't always do a PowerPoint for this show, but I am going to today because there's a sort of a number of details that are important to cover. Here, there we go. Okay. And here we are dealing with debt. So, like all things on all of the Way to Wow shows, we work within what's called the 3 pillars of attainment. And today we're going to be down here in the pursuits pillar, dealing with finances. Okay, and collateral issues oftentimes come up in terms of relationships and self, our identity, and our mindset. Okay, that certainly will be the case when we talk about, as we talk about debt. So we're going to be talking today specifically about consumer debt. Okay, so for those of you who are business owners or you have investments, maybe you're buying some real estate or something like that, not dealing with those types of debts. The issues are considerably different than the issues we're going to be dealing with today. So this is just personal indebtedness, okay? And there's really 5 major types of consumer indebtedness, and you see them here on the screen. There's credit cards, there's student loans, auto loans, mortgage loans, and payday loans. Okay, all of these have their purposes, and oftentimes you will hear various financial advisors saying, well, this one is bad, or this one is good, or this is predatory. I mean, those are all, judgments of debt, but the reality is at different times in our lives, all of these could be good, and most, if not all of them, could be bad. Okay, so it really depends on your individual circumstances. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of these 5 types of debt, consumer debt, in more detail now, and you'll see what I mean. So I think probably the most common type of consumer debt that people have is credit cards. Okay, it could be a Visa or MasterCard, or it could be an American Express. I mean, there are other credit cards out there. There used to be something called Diners Club, Carte Blanche, which you don't see so much. I don't even know if they exist anymore, actually. There's JCB, which comes from Japan. There used to be the Discover card. I'm not sure if that's around anymore either. Now, while they're all called credit cards, in reality, there is a difference between an American Express card and a Visa or MasterCard, okay? With an American Express card, the assumption is that the balance is going to be paid off each month, okay? Now, American Express does have a feature whereby some of your charges can be spread out over time. It's called pay over time, okay? But those have to be above a certain amount. So for the most part, with an American Express card, you're paying off your balance each month. That's why it used to be called a charge card. as opposed to a credit card, because a charge card, although it was giving you credit, you were really charging instead of paying cash with the understanding that it was going to be paid off at the end of the month. Okay. A credit card, no matter what the amount is, it does not have to be paid off each month. So a credit card will have a minimum payment that has to be paid, and we'll talk about how that's calculated a little bit later on in the show. But no specific charge on the credit card has to be paid off at the end of the period, at the end of the month, or whatever the period is. Okay. So credit cards are a type of revolving debt, meaning you pay it off, you charge it back up, you pay it off, you charge it back up. Now, most credit cards come with a credit limit. It may be $1,000, maybe $5,000, maybe $10,000. Okay. One of the differences between an American Express card and a Visa MasterCard is people perceive that the American Express cards have no credit limit. And in fact, they used to be advertised that way. That's not really true. They do have a limit. It's just the limit is based on your spending, your income, your spending habits, and all of that. Okay. And from time to time, you could hit your limit on an American Express card. You just wouldn't necessarily know it because they don't give you a stated limit. But having said that, if you were to go and try and charge the price of a Rolls Royce on your American Express card that you've had for a few months, unless you had already demonstrated that you have, the kind of income that would allow you to pay that charge off at the end of the month, they're not going to, that charge is going to get rejected. Okay. So that's another difference between American Express and other types of credit cards. Now, in general, credit cards have a high interest rate, okay? 18%, 19.2%. These are not unusual. Now, you can find credit cards with lower interest rate, maybe as low as 12%. And you will sometimes find where they have a low initial rate, like a teaser rate of maybe, 5-6%, okay? But generally speaking, those teaser rates are only for a limited period of time. They're to get you to, switch over to that credit card company or whatever. I don't see those nearly as much now as I used to. But overall, credit cards have a very high cost to them in terms of the interest rate. They may also have an annual fee for maintaining. So American Express, most of their cards have an annual fee, whether it's a green card, gold card, platinum, those all have fees. Now, there is something called a blue card, which is a no-fee American Express card. And that's actually really more like a credit card than it is a traditional American Express card, which is, I think, why they offer it at no fee. All right. So in general, credit card, and now more and more businesses are not accepting cash. They're only accepting credit cards. And there's so many different ways now with Apple Pay and Google Pay and Venmo and what's the other one? Shoot, I can't think of the other one. But anyway, there's a number, PayPal, there's a number of different services that allow you to use your credit cards very conveniently, which is good because, as I mentioned a minute ago, more and more businesses seem to not be taking cash. They're going cashless. So I know on my Apple Watch, if I click the right buttons, I have Apple Pay right on my watch. I don't even have to carry my credit cards with me if I don't want to. Now, Apple Pay is not universally accepted, and so I do carry my credit cards with me. But in many cases, I don't have to take them out of my pocket. I can just use my watch to pay the bill. By the way, I could do the same thing with my phone, because my phone has Apple Pay. And for those of you who are on Android, I'm not an Android user, but I assume Google Pay works pretty much the same way. So They're very, very convenient. Okay. Now, the key thing about credit cards is whether it's an American Express card where you need to pay off the balance at the end of each month, or a Visa MasterCard, which is a traditional credit card, they're perfectly fine to use them as long as you pay them off each month. If you pay them off or at the end of the payment period, if you pay them off at the end of the period, you don't pay any interest. And so that's perfectly fine. Okay. And I know for me, I have with American Express, they have a really good points program. And so it's to my benefit to charge everything on my American Express card, pay it off at the end of the month, because then I get all those fees and I can buy, books and other stuff on Amazon and this, that, and the other thing. Okay. So credit cards, people think, oh, credit cards are bad. Credit cards are not bad as long as you don't carry large balances. Okay. And I would add that now sometimes if you have an emergency and you just don't have a big enough emergency fund to cover it, or worse, you don't have an emergency fund at all, then it's going to be credit cards are going to be your saving grace. You'll be able to pay for that emergency. And then the idea is you'll want to pay that balance off as quickly as possible. And we'll talk about how to do that later on in the show. Okay. So unlike other people, I don't look at credit cards as being, bad or evil or whatever. Credit cards are a tool. They can be a very useful tool. They have to be used intelligently and responsibly. Okay, so that's credit cards. All right, next is a student loan. So a student loan is exactly what it says. And there's been a lot in the press about student loans over the last few years. Okay, student loan is a loan you get to go to college or university. Okay, now it's actually a secured debt in the sense that now it's the government basically that makes student loans. In my day, it was private lenders who made them. Now the federal government has taken over that program, and I think there are some state programs as well. But in essence, that loan is secured by your future earnings. In other words, the reason that the government is willing to lend you that money to go to college is because they're assuming your earnings are going to be higher with a college degree than they would have been without it. Okay. And the fact that you're going to have higher future earnings makes you a good credit risk. Okay. Now, I'm not going to get into all the political turmoil over student loans. The reality is that these days, I think the average student loan balance is around $40,000 or $50,000. And in some cases, there are multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars for people who use student loans to get a law degree or a medical degree, things like that. So people can pile up a lot of student debt. Now, if you're going to college, well, I'm going to take a step back and talk about college for just a moment. It used to be people went to college in order to expand their knowledge, right? That's why the humanities, the liberal arts, what are called the liberal arts, were so popular. You studied literature, you might study philosophy, these kind of things. Now, the things have really changed in the last, 20 or 30 years or so, in that a lot of people going to college now are doing so for job-related reasons. So for a long time, it was becoming ever more necessary to have a college degree to get a good job. Now, that trend has been reversing itself over the last, I'd say, 10 years or so. And a lot of big companies no longer require college degrees in order to work for them. And it can vary, of course, with the particular type of job as well. The other thing, too, is jobs that heretofore did not pay nearly as well have started paying a lot more money, and jobs that you don't need to go to college for didn't used to not pay as well, and nowadays they pay a lot more money. So, for example, you don't need a college degree to be an auto mechanic. And yet, if you were to go to, say, the Mercedes-Benz auto mechanic program, it wouldn't be unusual after you got out of that program to start making between $80,000 and $100,000 a year, depending on where you're located. So you can see that what's used to be called a trade program, or now they're called more vocational programs, they can put you in a much stronger financial position work-wise. Okay, plumbers, electricians, many of them make very substantial salaries nowadays. And part of it is because I think the sophistication of what these used to be called tradesmen, more technicians now do. That's part of it. And the other is there's just not enough of them to go around. And so when supply is low and demand is high, which as long as there's houses and other buildings, we're going to need plumbers and electricians and such. So the pay for those positions will increase. Okay, so I think again, a student loan is neither good nor bad. It depends on why you're going to school and why you're borrowing the money. And by the way, I think it's perfectly fine if you want to go to college to expand your knowledge and your depth of understanding. That's a perfectly legitimate reason to go to college. Just understand that a degree in a field like literature or philosophy may not necessarily translate into higher earnings than you would have been able to obtain if you didn't go to college. Now, that isn't to say you shouldn't get those kind of degrees, perfectly legitimate, but just I think people need to understand what they're getting themselves into. Okay. On the other hand, to go to college to get a law degree, or to go into accounting, or to go into the sciences or mathematics. Okay, so historically, especially over the last 20 plus 30 years or whatever, these kinds of fields, when you have a degree in them, do mean higher earnings, usually from the get-go, and certainly over the long run, things like computer science. Okay, I just saw in I think it was the Wall Street Journal yesterday, there is a scarcity of petroleum engineers, and so these positions are paying a lot more. And there's various reasons. Young people don't want to go into what they see as being a field that's bad for the environment, that kind of thing. Setting those issues aside for a moment, engineering still is a field where a degree is probably going to lead you to a higher income than you would have had without the degree. And by the way, there are people who are self-taught in these fields. I have a close friend who's a self-taught data scientist, and he's done very well over the years that he's been doing that. He has no college degree at all. So it's not to say that you can't be self-taught and get these bigger paychecks. It's just, do you have the self-discipline to teach yourself? That's the question. So all of these are reasons or issues to consider before taking on a student loan. Okay. Now, the fact of the matter is student loans overall have a pretty low interest rate, and they have pretty favorable repayment terms. In fact, if you've been, following the news for the last several years since COVID, there was a moratorium on student loan payments. I think it ended last month, if I'm not mistaken, or it ends this month. But in any event, it's been about 3 years since people with student loans had to make payments. Okay, and as well, there are certain programs where if you work in community, work for a nonprofit or work in community service for a certain period of time, then at the end of that period of time, if you have any loan balance left, that it can be forgiven. There's discussions, all kinds of different discussions about what's going to happen with student loan repayments. Okay, so whether any of those, if you're considering getting a student loan today, whether any of those repayment plans are still going to be available, in 4 years when you get out of school, I don't know. These things do change. And this is one of those sort of volatile topics in American society today. So I recommend you look carefully at, why am I getting the degree? What is going to be the benefit to me? If I do have to pay off all the money myself, is that really something that I want to do, even if it doesn't give me any higher earnings? And in the end, just make an informed decision, okay, so that you're not regretting having this, pile of student debt. Okay, let's look at the next one. Auto loans. Okay. Most people, when they buy a car, they do not pay cash for it, unless maybe they're buying a very low cost used car, if there is such a thing anymore. I'm not sure there is, because the price of used cars has gone up so much. Okay. But in any event, auto loans are a very, I try to do these pretty much in the order of, I think, how frequently people have these. I'm not sure if more people have school loans than auto loans. Maybe not. Maybe an auto loan is next most common after credit card, something like that. But in any event, an auto loan is a very common form of consumer debt. Now, it's a secured loan, meaning that the car that you buy is going to be security for the lender. And there's going to be a lien against the car. So if you don't make your payments, the lender is going to repossess the car. That's how it works, right? Notice how different that is from a credit card. If you buy, let's say, a living room set on your credit card, and you don't pay your credit card bill, that living room set is not security for the credit card debt. Okay, so the credit card company cannot send someone to repossess your living room furniture. Credit cards are an unsecured debt most of the time. Now, there are forms of secured credit cards. That's kind of a special case. I'm not going to deal with that today. But an auto loan is a secured debt, okay? And it will, on the title to your car, the lender's name is going to appear as having a lien on the car. And that lien is what gives the lender the ability to repossess the car if you don't comply with the loan terms. Okay, it's what's called an installment debt, because from the beginning of the loan, you know how many payments it's going to take in order to pay off that car loan, what the size of those payments are going to have to be. Okay, we're going to talk numbers later on in the show, but you'll see what I mean by an installment debt. Okay, and the interest that you'll pay on it is going to really vary by your credit score. Now, it can also it's also going to vary by whether you're buying a new or a used car. It's going to vary based on what the term of the loan is. Is it a 36-month loan, 48, 60-month? There's even 72-month loans now. Okay. But the main variable is going to be your credit score. Okay. The higher your credit score is, the better the interest rate you're going to get. Okay. Now, I've mentioned this in a previous show, the idea of leasing a car. Now, an automobile lease is really just a different way of borrowing money to essentially own a car. Okay. What you're doing in a lease is you're only financing some of the price of the car. Okay. And at the end of the lease, you have to give the car back or pay off whatever the balance is on the car, whatever what's called the residual value is. Okay. And from that standpoint, an auto lease is very similar to an auto loan. People think of them as being different, but fundamentally they're not. It's really just an auto lease is really just an auto loan with a balloon payment, and it keeps the size of the payment down. Okay, and you're going to see when we look at numbers, even a moderately priced car today, the payment can be pretty big. okay, which is one of the reasons why a lot of times people lease cars, is it lowers their payment, or they can get a much nicer car at a lower payment, okay, and at the end of the lease, they give the car back and they start all over again. Now, that's fine. And there are reasons why you may not care if you have a perpetual car payment, but otherwise, you may not want to always have to make a car payment, and so then a lease may not be the best vehicle. I'd say that, sort of pun in cheek, as they say. A lease may not be the best vehicle for purchasing a car. Okay. Again, you need to look at your individual circumstances. This is all general guidance on the topic of, in this case, auto loans, but just debt in general. Okay, so that's an auto loan, and we're doing okay on time. Good. All right. Next is a mortgage loan, okay, or a home loan. They go by, different names. Okay, mortgage is kind of an old term. It's been around for several hundred years, as far as I know. Many mortgage loans today that you don't actually have a mortgage. Here in California, when you borrow money to buy a home, they call it a mortgage, but you don't have a document called a mortgage. What you have is a document called a trust deed. Okay, so in the case of a loan to buy a home, generally speaking, there's going to be at least two documents to that loan. One is a note, and that note is the actual loan itself. Okay, it's the evidence that the lender has lent money to you in order to buy your home. And then there's going to be some kind of security device. Okay, that's what a mortgage is. A mortgage is actually the document that gives the lender a lien on your home, so that if you don't make the payments, the lender can foreclose on you and take the home and sell it in order to pay off the loan. Okay. Now, in California, we have a different kind of security device called a trust deed. The trust deed makes it much easier for a lender to foreclose. Okay, let me explain the difference briefly. Excuse me. If a lender has a mortgage, an actual mortgage type lien on your home, in order to foreclose, they have to file a type of legal action called a foreclosure action. It's a court action, and they use the mortgage to foreclose on you. And because it's a court action, it takes time. There's a lot of costs associated with it. Okay. And there can be appeals and all the things that come up with any kind of court hearing or court procedure. Okay. So a mortgage loan can be difficult a mortgage secured loan can be difficult for the lender to foreclose. Okay. On a trust deed, unlike the mortgage, you do not have to go to court to foreclose on a trust deed. I mean, you can, but there's no reason to. Okay. So in a trust deed, you have the trustor, that's the lender. You have the beneficiary, which is the borrower, because they're getting the money. And then you have a trustee. That trustee is supposed to be a neutral third party. Really what they are is they're a different party than the lender. And if you don't make your payments on a trust deed secured home loan, the lender will contact the trustee. They will give evidence that you haven't made your payments, and they will ask the trustee to foreclose in what's called a non-judicial foreclosure. Okay, what's going to happen is the trustee will initially file what's called file with the county recorder and serve on you a notice of default. That means that you have not complied with certain terms of the loan. Okay, and you have 3 months to secure that default. maybe to not secure the default, to make up the default. So let's say you're behind a month or two in your payments. Let's say it's 2 months, because generally lenders won't file won't have trustees file a default after a month. Well, let's say you're 2 months behind, and the lender has tried to call you, you haven't responded, or you have, but you don't have the money. So the lender decides to foreclose. In order to cure the default, you're going to have to pay those 2 months back payments, plus any costs the lender has had in dealing with having the trustee file that notice of default. Okay. Now, by the way, the cost of that is much lower than filing a judicial foreclosure that you would with a mortgage. Okay. But nonetheless, you're going to have to make up those costs. There may be late fees, some other things associated with it. If you cure the default, the loan is put back in good standing and off you go. And as long as you don't miss any more payments, you're fine. If within 3 months you do not cure the default, now the lender is going to contact the trustee and say, hey, it's been 3 months, haven't gotten, the default has not been cured, foreclose. Okay. And so then the trustee will file a notice of sale, and that notice of sale will be posted on the property itself. Okay. And that notice of sale, generally speaking, gives, well, it gives, not generally, it gives 3 weeks. It could give more, but it gives a minimum of 3 weeks, at which time, if the loan hasn't been essentially paid off, okay, including costs and expenses that the lender has borne, the property can be sold at a public auction. Okay. Now, when I say hasn't, generally speaking, hasn't been paid off, it may be that you can make a deal with the lender to get the loan back in good standing without paying it off. You can always try negotiating. Some lenders will negotiate, others won't. Okay. And there's other ways to get out of a foreclosure as well. You might end up doing what's called a short sale, for example, if the home is not worth the amount of the loan. There's different other ways to deal with it. But in any event, if at the end of the 3 weeks of the notice of sale, the loan hasn't been dealt with, then the trustee can hold an auction and can sell your home. Okay. At the end of the sale, assuming there's been a buyer's that's been accepted, that's it. You no longer own the home. Now, with a mortgage, at the point where the court orders the property sold and the sale is held, the buyer, I'm sorry, not the buyer, the homeowner has a 1-year period of redemption in most jurisdictions. So even though the home has already been sold, the homeowner who lost the home could come back within a year, pay off all the money, and still end up owning the home. They have this redemption period. You have no redemption period under a trustee secured type home loan. Okay. All right. So that's when we call it a secured debt. That's how it works. And that's the types. Now, a mortgage, generally speaking, is a long-term debt. 30-year mortgages are very common. You also see 15-year mortgages for people who want to pay their loans off more quickly. And I've heard about 40-year mortgages. I've never seen one, candidly, but I've heard they're out there. I suppose for very high-priced homes, a 40-year mortgage, it will lower the payment even more than a 30-year mortgage. And so that, that may be out there. Okay. Now, the interest that you pay on a home loan is going to vary by credit score, the loan to value ratio, meaning how much of a down payment you make. It's also going to vary by programs. So an FHA loan or a VA guaranteed loan, generally speaking, will have a little bit lower interest rate than a conventional loan. A loan that falls under the conforming limit, meaning it's a loan of a size that will be bought by Fannie Mae. I'm not going to get into all that secondary market mechanism for loans today, but there's something called a conforming loan. and it means that it's in an amount where Fannie Mae will buy it. They generally have a lower interest rate than a jumbo loan. A jumbo loan exceeds the conforming loan limit. Okay. So all of these are factors in determining the interest rate that you'll pay on a mortgage loan. So are mortgage loans good or bad? Well, it depends on your circumstances. If you can't afford to pay a mortgage loan and you've got one, I guess it's bad, right? But in general, mortgage loans are considered to be good. If we were to go back to the 1930s and earlier, before there was an active marketplace for mortgages, most people, if they wanted to buy a house, you had to just pay cash for the house. Okay, and the vast majority of people couldn't afford to do that. So the rate of home ownership was pretty low in this country. Okay, and then with the advent of the Federal Home Loan Bank and the creation of a standard way of making mortgage loans, okay, the ability of a middle-class American to buy a house was greatly increased. Now I think home ownership in the country, I'm not exactly sure what the percentage is, but I think it's in the 60%, and 62%, 65 maybe. I think it's somewhere around in there, okay? Much, much higher than it was 100 years ago, okay? And the reality is, to own a home, let me be careful how I word this. Most people seem to think that to own a home is the best thing or is better than renting. Now, that may be the case, but not necessarily, okay? A lot has to do with interest rate levels, rent levels, where tax laws are at, what part of the country you're in, okay, how likely it is that the value of the home will go up. So from a strictly numerical standpoint, although it seems like it's best to own a home, that is not necessarily the case. It may be better to rent, okay? So and it can be a somewhat sophisticated calculation to figure that out, again, beyond what we're going to be covering today. However, for many people, owning a home gives them a sense of security. They own the home. They can decide what's going to be done with it, how it's going to be fixed up. They don't have to answer to anybody. So it's what I would call a lifestyle decision. And indeed, I would recommend that you look at home ownership as a lifestyle decision, in the sense of, do you want the security that generally comes from owning your own home? Concurrent with that, do you want the responsibility that comes from owning a home, having to deal with the maintenance issues, having to pay the taxes and the insurance, having to have that make the mortgage payments, having the responsibility for the mortgage payments was what I was trying to think of saying. If you don't want all that responsibility, then maybe the security of owning a home doesn't really mean that much to you, and you're better off renting from a lifestyle perspective, okay? So those are some of the questions to think about as you make a decision about whether to own a home or not, okay? And that can be something you think about as a young person getting started, but can also be something you think about as you're, making your way through life. You may get to the point where you just don't want to deal with the headaches of home ownership, okay? And so that's why I call home ownership a lifestyle decision. It's not an investment decision necessarily, okay? The other thing is, although we've seen rapid increases in home prices, generally speaking, the last few years, there is no, 11th commandment, thy home shalt increase in value, which, especially here in Southern California, people seem to think that there is that 11th commandment. No, even here in, hallowed Southern California, home prices do drop sometimes, okay? Especially homes at the higher end of the market. So there isn't any guarantee that if you buy a house today, it will necessarily be worth more money, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Okay. It really depends on the marketplace. Okay. And with population shifting so much now, I think it's much more difficult to predict today where there will be home price increases and where there may be, flat home prices for the long term or even decreases. It's hard to say. There's been a lot of out migration from areas that historically have had very high home prices, places like New York and California. And I think one of the reasons people are leaving is because of the cost of homes. And there's been a big influx into other areas that historically have had low and fairly stable home prices, places like Indiana, Ohio, places like that. Okay, so what does that bode for the future? It's hard to say. What I would recommend is you get professional advice about a particular market in which you're interested before you make a decision. Either that and do your homework. Okay, so that's mortgage loans. All said and done, mortgage loans are, I think, generally speaking, a type of debt that is, perhaps most likely to be good. We'll put it that way. Okay. All right. Next, payday loans. Okay. So if you were to do like a Google search on payday loans, you would see these are predatory, they're this, they're that. Look, payday loans have their purpose. And if they were truly 120% bad, then nobody would borrow the money. But the fact of the matter is, especially for lower income people who don't have an emergency fund available, sometimes a payday loan is what they're going to need in order to be able to pay for some kind of health care or pay for food. Maybe they've had a temporary setback in work or something like that, and they need this sort of stopgap loan in order to survive. So look, all things being equal, this would be the last type of loan I think you would want to take out. But just because it's the last type doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad. Okay, if you've got no other choice, if it's be on the street or get a payday loan, then payday loan may be a perfectly valid choice. Okay, so I wouldn't listen to the people who would tell you that payday loans are predatory and they're evil. First of all, it depends on the payday lender, number one. And number two, it depends on why you're getting the loan. Certainly outside of an emergency circumstance, a payday loan doesn't make sense because of what we're going to talk about now. First of all, well, it's an unsecured debt, generally speaking. Okay, well, that's fine. It's a short-term debt, meaning it's got to be paid off in a very short period of time, 2 weeks, maybe a little bit more than that. Okay, and that can make it very difficult. So unless you know the money is coming in to pay the loan off, borrowing the money just to have one more debt probably doesn't make any sense, especially because the interest rates tend to be very high. Okay, so that's why I say this is kind of a loan of last resort, okay, for an emergency, and when you're going to have the money coming in to repay it, right? This isn't, people say, well, it's legal loan sharking. Well, they're probably not going to break your arm if you don't pay the payday loan. I've never heard of that. Not if you're going to a reputable payday lender. Okay, but the reality is the interest rates are high, and if you have to renew a payday loan, that interest can build up pretty quickly. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're having to renew a payday loan. You want, if you're going to take out a payday loan, you want to be as certain as you can possibly be that when it comes due, you are going to have the money to pay it off. Okay. Now, if it's a choice between getting health care for you or your child or something like that or not, well, then, that may be what you decide to do. And it's probably, I would think it would be better than watching your child suffer. Okay, so this is why I refrain from condemning outright payday loans. Sometimes, we get ourselves into difficult circumstances. We wish we hadn't. We learn a lesson, and then we, hopefully improve our financial situation so we don't have to use something like a payday loan in the future. But in the meantime, it may have been our saving grace. So I wouldn't reject them just out of hand. Okay, so those are the five most common types of consumer debts. There are other types out there. I don't want to get into, every single permutation. It's too much. These are the most common ones. Okay, so I want to talk about one other concept before I get into the numbers, and that is something called financial leverage. Okay, now, assuming you're not borrowing because you have to, like we were just talking about, you had an emergency, you got to pay for healthcare, or you need money to pay your rent, otherwise you're going to get evicted. Setting aside those emergency circumstances, okay? Financial leverage is typically why it can be worthwhile to borrow money, okay? Now, in general, financial leverage is used, we're using debt to increase potential return. Now, I said this is really on consumer debt. So I'm not going to talk about investments so much, although financial leverage has much more applicability to investments than it does to just regular consumer transactions. Okay. But what I want to talk about, where I want to talk about financial leverage, is in buying a house. Okay, so the reality is, as I was saying about home loans a little while ago, most of us can't afford to buy a house and pay cash. Okay, the median price of a home in the country now is, I think, around $400,000, right? How many of us can just like, well, okay, I'm going to write a check for, here you go, buyer or seller, here's, $400,000 plus fees, to buy your home. Most of us can't do that. Okay, so the advantage of financial leverage is we can buy an asset that we otherwise couldn't afford. Okay, now, generally speaking, and this applies to investments, we have something called positive financial leverage when the rate of return on our investment is higher than the interest rate on the loan. Now, since with a home, we're not getting a rate of return, so we don't really talk about positive or negative financial leverage with respect to a home. But here's the thing. Remember when I was talking about owning versus renting? So this is where the concept of financial leverage comes in really figuring out on a numerical basis whether it's better from a financial standpoint to own or rent your home. Part of that is going to have to do with financial leverage. Okay, I'm going to talk in a future show in much more depth about financial leverage because I'll deal with it in the context of investments. But you'll also see then how it works in terms of a home as well. Now, there are risks to using financial leverage. And one of them is that you're more vulnerable to market changes. So let's say you bought a house for $400,000, and then one of the major employers in the area closes down. Okay, that's likely to cause a recession in that area. There doesn't have to be a nationwide recession for a particular region or area to suffer from recession. And suffering from recession, you may see home values drop. So let's say that home values dropped from $400,000 to $360,000. Okay, now let's say, by the way, you put 20% down. So on a $400,000 house, you put down $80,000. If the value of the house drops to 360, you've lost half your down payment. Okay, half your down payment. All right, so it increases It increases your loss in the on a percentage basis. Now, if you had paid cash for the house, $400,000, and it dropped by $40,000 to $360,000, you've lost 10% of your investment. Okay, you've still lost $40,000, but it only represents 10% of your investment instead of 50% of your $80,000 down payment. Okay, so leverage can be good. It has benefits. It has risks. Okay, and I just wanted to touch on this concept because it relates specifically to buying a home. Now, it could relate to other things as well, although generally speaking, other consumer purchases that we make, the rate of interest we're going to pay on those loans, whether it's a credit card or even an auto loan, is going to be higher than any return we could make, renting that car out or the furniture out. And so your financial leverage in personal property like that, generally speaking, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Okay, so, and I think that's what that's the last, yeah. Okay, so if you, here's about the questions and such. I'm going to return to this because what I want to do now is get into some numbers, which are right here. Okay. Now, if you see this Excel spreadsheet, this is a pretty simple example. Okay, so let's say this particular person has 2 credit cards, an auto loan, and a mortgage loan. Okay, and the first credit card has a balance of a little over $5,400 at 18% interest. Okay, and the monthly payment is $190. Now, where does that come from? Well, generally speaking, the credit card company is going to calculate the monthly payment at whatever the interest is for that month. Okay, so if it's 18% interest per year, it's going to be 1.5% interest per month. Okay, so you're going to pay 1.5% interest on the balance, plus somewhere between 2 and 4% of the balance due. Okay, so in this case, I think I used 2% of I used 2% of the balance due. Okay, so the payment for this month, for the upcoming month, is going to be $190. Now, having paid down the balance of the credit card a little bit, next month's payment will be a little bit less, and then a little bit less, but it's going down just tiny amounts each month. Okay. Then you have a second credit card with a balance of about $3,700. In this case, the interest rate is 19.2%. Okay, and you can see that although the balance is about 2/3, the interest rate is high. You're still paying $132 a month, and I calculated it the same way. Okay. In this case, the monthly interest rate would be 1.6%, and then 2% of the balance. That's what makes up the $132. Okay, now here's an auto loan, and the amount of the auto loan, this is including taxes, license, and all that kind of stuff, $32,600. The interest rate is 6.75% for a 60-month term. Okay, and this is why this is an installment loan, in that you're going to pay, it's probably going to be 59 payments of $641.83. Typically, the last payment is going to be just a little bit different, a little bit higher or lower, depending on rounding errors and that kind of thing. But basically, you're going to pay 60 payments of about $642. Okay. And then you have your mortgage. So you got a mortgage of $300,000. Which means, let's say if you put 20% down, you bought a house for what, about $370,000 thereabout. You put about $70,000 down. Okay, you got a $300,000 mortgage for 30 years or 360 months. Okay, at 6.5%. Okay, and that works out to this is a fixed mortgage of $1,820 per month. Okay, and you'll make 360 payments of $1,820. Now, again, just like with the car, in reality, that final payment is probably going to be just a little bit different, but for our purposes, we're going to say they're all the same. All right, so what is the most well, first of all, what debts do you want to get rid of, and what debts might you not have to worry about getting rid of? Well, for sure, you want to get rid of the 2 credit card debts. You're paying very, very high interest, okay? And there's no asset behind it that's of any value, okay? So there's no chance, for example, that what you, well, I don't want to say no chance. There's very little chance that whatever you bought with this money that you borrowed is going to go up in value so fast that it becomes worth, you know, that it appreciates by 20% per year, year over year over year. Okay, it probably dropped in value dramatically after you bought it. Okay, so you really don't want to carry balances on a credit card unless you absolutely have to. Okay, now the same is true generally of an auto loan. Okay, while you paid $32,600 thereabouts for your car, the minute you drove it off the lot, okay, its value dropped and it's no longer worth that kind of money. Now, depending on what kind of car it is, for a car in this price point, it's going to almost for sure drop in value. Now, if you bought, you know, a Rolls Royce and you drove it off the lot, it wouldn't necessarily drop in value below what you paid for it. Rolls Royce values tend to maintain, and there are other cars that are worth more now than they were when, you know, they were first sold. Okay, but those, generally speaking, we're not buying those kind of cars. And so the idea that your car is going to increase in value, say 7% per year, year over year, and make it worthwhile for you to, you know, not pay off this loan, very unlikely. Okay, so you want to pay off the auto loan as well. Now, the mortgage loan is different. Okay, while there are financial advisors out there who tell you want to pay off your home loan as quickly as possible, that's not necessarily true. It depends on what else you can do with that money. Okay, that's number one. Number two, in California, we have something called a homeowner's exemption. Okay, if you get sued and the value of your home is less than the homeowner's exemption plus the loan on the house, your home cannot be taken from you to pay the person who was successful in suing you. Okay, so there may be an incentive in that case to really not pay off your home loan. And the reality is you got to live somewhere. Okay, so if this is much less expensive than renting, well, so then that's fine. You're saving money in terms of your cost of shelter. Okay, and if the interest rate is low enough that, you know, you couldn't invest the money somewhere else at a reliably higher rate of return, then it may not make sense to pay off your home loan. That's going to depend. Now, there are financial advisors that say, well, I can get you 12% year over year over year. Well, they've been able to do that for the last, 10 years that the market has been very, very good. But just because the market has been on an upswing doesn't mean it can't go on a downswing, right? And the market can be volatile. So the reality is, it may not make sense for you to pay off your mortgage loan. That's a more complex question, okay? And a much more specific question to your specific circumstances. Okay, so what do you want to do? Well, the reality is, although I've got credit card number 2 here, second in the list, what you're going to want to do is put it first on the list. It has the highest interest rate, and you want to pay it off as quickly as possible. If your budget is really constrained and all you can afford to do is make the minimum payment on all your debts, which together work out to be about $2,800 a month, well, then that's what you'll do. Any extra money you get should go to paying off this debt first. Okay? Get that paid off as quickly as possible. So let's say you were able to pay, say, $200, let's say you have an extra $75 a month. Okay, rather than spreading it out, focus it all on paying off this debt. Okay, so pay $200 a month. In that way, okay, you will reduce the balance much more quickly. Okay, so if you pay off $200 a month, okay, once you've got this paid off, instead of it taking whatever it is, 4 years to pay off, maybe you can pay it off in 2 years or 18 months even. Then whatever amount of money you were using to pay this off of, now add it on here and pay $390 a month. And that, see how now you're basically doubling this payment. You'll pay this off much more quickly. Okay. Now, once you've got this paid off, once you've got credit card number 1 paid off, take that $390, add it to your car payment, and you're going to be paying off about $1,030 a month on your car. And very quickly, you'll pay off the balance of that car loan. Okay. That way, you will get rid of the highest interest rate debt first. Okay. And you will be able to retire the lower interest rate debts afterwards. Now, there is one exception to this rule or to this plan, and that is, let's say you had a third credit card. Oops. Oh, let me just copy this real quickly. Copy, paste. Okay. So we have credit card number 3 now. And let's say you owe $782.01 on it. Okay. And let's say the interest rate is actually 16%. Okay. So in reality, your payment is only $26 a month. Okay. Still, and the interest rate is lower than these other ones. Still, pay off this one first. And the reason you want to do that is by quickly getting rid of one of your monthly payments. First of all, it gives you momentum in getting rid of a debt. Second of all, it allows you more flexibility. Okay, so if in your debt elimination plan, an emergency comes up, and now all of a sudden you're not able to put this extra money to paying this debt off, still you're going to be better off having just these 2 credit cards than having all 3. So if one of your credit cards has a low balance that you can pay off pretty quickly, get that one paid off first, even if it's a lower interest rate, okay, to just get rid of that debt. Okay, now, depending on what your level of self-discipline is, okay, in general, you don't want to close the credit cards that you've paid off. You want to leave them open, and that's because of how credit scores work. I'm not going to get into the details of credit scores, but the best thing you can do is to have all 3 of these balances go down to 0. Okay, and then what happens is the percentage of available credit that you're actually using, that percentage goes down, and that increases your credit score. Or it can increase your credit score. That's one of the things that can. Okay, so that's the goal. All right. So this is a very simple, easy to use way to eliminate your credit card debt. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing now. We're actually a little bit over an hour here, but this is such an important topic, getting out of debt, and it will mean all the difference to your future. So once you have that car loan paid off, you were paying over $1,000 a month, right? Now you can take that $1,000 a month and invest it. Okay, if you have a retirement plan at work, maybe and there's a matching program, maybe you can increase to the maximum what you're putting away in your retirement program at work and get the maximum matching. or maybe you can start a separate IRA or a Roth IRA, and build that up, or just start saving money. Even if it's not in a retirement plan, maybe you want to save money so you can have a vacation. Of course, you want to have an emergency fund. That's crucial to have so that you don't have to borrow on credit cards if an emergency comes up, okay? So after you've paid down that debt, all of a sudden you have some flexibility, and you can or you can set up your finances in a much sounder, better way going forward and really start building wealth. Okay, so that's what I've got for you today. I hope you found that useful. And if you have any questions, look down in the show notes. There, my email address is there. You can post a question in any of the social media sites for the show. By the way, and feel free to post comments, good and bad, criticisms. Please don't tell me that Dave Ramsey says I'm wrong. I know Dave Ramsey says I'm wrong. I disagree with what Dave Ramsey says about debt, and that's fine. I know a lot of people really like what Dave Ramsey has to say, and I respect what he has to say. I disagree with him on some small points. And look, that's what it is. I've dealt firsthand with a lot of people in the military and their finances. I know they always found it strange that a chaplain was helping with their finances. I would tell them, until you feel financially solid, you probably don't care a whole lot about, Bible study. So that was always my philosophy. But in any event, if you have thoughts, criticism, whatever, feel free to drop those in our social media as well. So just to mention, next week, we start again on Monday at 10 a.m. with Trusts and Estates Weekly. On Tuesday at 11 a.m., these are all Pacific time, is Business Lessons from the Military. And then we'll be back here again 7 days from today at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time with the next episode of People Making Money. So I thank you very much for watching. Just asking you one favor before I go. If you're not a subscriber to our YouTube channel, please do consider subscribing. And that way you'll get notified each time there's a new broadcast coming on and a new episode post. You won't miss any. And if there's something here that's useful to one of your friends, please pass it along to them. That's the reason for doing the show, is to help you and your friends, your family with your finances, with your professional lives. So one more time, I thank you very much for watching and wishing you a wonderful rest of the day and a great rest of the week. Take care and see you next week.